studies show that 25% of American men have an AI bot as a sexual companion, an intimate companion. They are bringing that way of thinking about AI into your business. Businesses have woken up to the fact that if they are using AI in many places, apart from the EU, the foundational model developers are not in the frame for liability. If we don't start voicing our views now, I think we will find ourselves moving into a future where we have less and less control as human beings.
So this week on GAEA Talks, Kay Firth-Butterfield. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's get into it. You have a remarkable experience. You have a fantastic book. Would you mind giving the viewers and listeners an idea to your background and an introduction into the topics that you've covered in your book?
Yeah, certainly. So I started my life as a barrister. And in fact, I am still a human rights barrister as an associate tenant of Doughty Street Chambers in London, where I co-lead the AI team there. I then had a short sojourn as a judge. I hated being a judge. So that wasn't what I wanted for the rest of my life. And after that, we moved to America, and I taught in Austin, Texas. So professor. And then really became very interested in humans and human rights and the singularity as people were thinking about superintelligence in sort of 2012. And that really gave me an opportunity to write about it, think about it, be in touch with some of the other academics. There were maybe 5 or 10 of us in those days who were also thinking about this at that very early stage. And then Stephen Hawking wrote an article in the Times of London where he said that AI might be the last thing that humans do or the best thing that humans do. And I happened to sit next to a CEO of an AI company on a plane the week afterwards. It was a 10-hour journey from London to Austin. And we talked about this article of Stephen Hawking's. And as we were getting off the plane, he asked me to go and work for him and think about these big problem issues that were coming to the fore. And that was 2014. So I became the world's first chief AI ethics officer by serendipity. But that meant, of course, that when journalists wanted to talk to somebody, it became me. So I was very fortunate to have this opportunity in my career. I worked with them. Sadly, it was a startup. It didn't go anywhere, as so many startups do. And but I went to the World Economic Forum. I was the inaugural head of AI and then quantum at the World Economic Forum. We did a lot of thinking about international governance and helping companies to govern themselves using AI. And I started my own business, Good Tech Advisory, in 2023. And along the way, I've won some awards. So Time Impact Award for AI in 2024. And I always say only four people get to win that award, whereas, the time 100 people get to win that one. Forbes, Who's Who, all sorts of awards for being a woman in tech and really sort of being at the start of these conversations. And so just recently in January, my book, Coexisting with AI, was released. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about all things AI and some things from the book as we go along, Graeme.
So the title of the book and the term coexistence, we're moving into a time now where I think it's dawning upon the general public, or the general narrative, the consensus of modern life, where AI is at a real pace changing everything. It comes with the risk, it comes with the opportunity. Can you give an insight into, in your mind and from your experience, what coexistence looks like?
Yes, absolutely. I deliberately use the word coexistence because I am worried that we talk about AI all the time and we don't talk about humans using AI. And really, we need to sort of think about the framing. It's not AI that should be driving us towards our future. It should be humans who are using AI to drive to a better future. And so with coexisting, it's quite clear that whether we're at work or play, or in some cases in love, or are soldiers in the field of war, or are elderly, we are all going to be using AI in some form or other. And so with the book, I said, well, okay, being a great Shakespeare fan, Shakespeare has told all the best stories. And one of those stories is As You Like It. And J. talks about the 7 ages of man. And so that's how I built the book. So I looked first at the infant, then at the the school child, and then worked my way through all those 7 stages of man, and came out at the other end with a chapter looking to the future. And I think that it's quite clear, having been through that in my mind, that AI is at all stages of our lives. And it's really, really important for everyone to understand and to make a choice. So it doesn't have to be at every stage of your life, or you can choose how you want it to be at every stage in your life. So we humans are not sort of passive actors where AI acts upon us. If we have, and that's why I wrote the book, if we have the knowledge, we can then make our own decisions about how we use it and how our families use it and how our employees use it.
And it seems across all of those age ranges and all the different stages of life that one of the fundamental keys, and especially if you also then refer that within a context like the World Economic Forum, the idea of education in a fluid manner. And I see it in business at an enterprise level, where the people that are making the decisions, and of course across the business, whether it's from corporate security, marketing, HR, people are already very busy. And with such a rapid change, whilst there is incredible opportunity, equally there's incredible risk. How does one ascertain whether the positive or the negative when the landscape changes so much? And even looking at other stages, other parts of life, walks of life, the benefit to understanding, and also younger people tend to adopt technology when they're young, on a perpetual basis, they're probably better adopters because it's part of the natural growing phase. How do we address education in every walk of life to understand what AI actually is beyond a broad term? And how should people be looking at it? What questions should they be asking in the absence of knowledge which simply wasn't there before?
Yeah, sure. And that's exactly why I wrote the book, because the book is not organized so that I tell people what to do. I tell people the benefits and the risks, and allowing people to make their own judgments as they go through. In terms of business, I think there are a number of issues that are coming up. One of the things that I saw at Davos this year was the windows looked different because it had been all about AI. And it was still all about AI, but a lot of the windows said, we can help you with your ROI with AI. And so clearly there are some struggles to really make back your investment going on amongst companies. And I think that there are so many things that companies have perhaps missed. They went into it thinking, oh, if we don't, we'll be left behind. But there are some important things that are now showing themselves. You know, did you procure the right tools? Do you have an internal advisory board that fits across the whole of the company and isn't just siloed around AI and how it's being used? And so, in some companies, they're using it in HR, but the general counsel doesn't know, or risk and compliance aren't part of those decisions. And you really need that joined up thinking. In many companies, boards don't understand enough about AI, and so they're not asking the right questions of their C-suite. And then I think there are lots of companies where the employees have been given AI, but they don't really understand how to use it, and that in itself causes risk. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But the other side, of course, is now that we're seeing agents, they again have companies de-risked their agents. There was an IDC study that came out, I think, last week that said that they expected 20% of major companies using AI to have been sued because of their agents by 2030. So, again, have you got an internal board that is reviewing this, making sure that you have got the right guardrails in place? And for many, maybe they need an external advisory board, or indeed somebody just to phone up an expert. Um, that's it, to my mind, is one of the cheapest ways to putting a small external advisory board is one of the cheapest ways of keeping your business on track and up to date with everything that's happening. So I said I'd come back to training. Training is something that is so important, and it's different for each element. As you rightly said, we've got young people who are AI natives, but that in itself brings problems. And just to pick two, we know that studies show that 25% of American men have an AI bot as a sexual companion, an intimate companion. They are bringing that way of thinking about AI into your business. Whereas you might want them to think about AI as a machine that is really good at predicting the reasoning. AI is good at prediction and logic, but it's basically a machine. And so you might want to make sure that when they're at work, they're thinking of this as a machine that can lead them astray. And so two pieces of that. One, the hallucinations. Uh, um, we're increasingly seeing hallucinations. The big LLMs still hallucinate up to 60%. And hallucinations in your company data, so mistakes effectively in your company data, that then goes back into your proprietary data, means that those mistakes are there for other employees to use and use again. So it's bad for your internal data, and it's also bad if reports with hallucinations go out into the world. I think the other piece is work slop. We had, the MIT study showed that people use AI and don't do the work properly. And then somebody else has to catch that, and it takes them up to 2 hours to put it right. And why are they having to catch it? Well, I think that's the other point that I wanted to make about AI natives. There are studies now that show that students are using AI so much to do their homework in undergrad, because of course most people have been in undergrad during the generative AI time, that they actually don't know enough to have passed the core subject of their undergrad course. And I was at a university just last week, and a professor of AI said to me that one of her students had come and said, I could you explain this code? And the professor said, well, why can't you explain it to me? And it turned out that the young person had never written code. They had relied upon an AI to write the code. If you don't write the code, then you can't look for the problems.
In many ways, and we see this with the development teams that we work with on other things, having years worth of experience in having the responsibility for structuring how you develop projects, having the relationship of, well, we've got infrastructure on one side, of course you've got the scalability, you've got the security aspects, that there's a lot to it. I mean, for a full software engineer, it's 90% cerebral considerations. Even traditionally, architecting, understanding the complexities, what are the use case scenarios that you're dealing with, who's the end customer, what's the point and purpose, which also then lends itself into engaging in relationships with other parts of a business and understanding who the customer directly is of the user of the software, and then who the company's customer is, which obviously can be different if you're working with lots of departments. The idea of data, trusted data, truthful data, the integrity of data as it is formed, originated. I mean, most companies already traditionally have elements of corrupted data. I mean, a typical HR system probably isn't fully up to date with everyone's address and everyone's phone number. A number of large corporates I'm aware of over the last 5 to 10 years move to opt-in only, which means when there's a crisis, and you could be, when we're talking at US here, so a major hurricane or an active shooting, when the security team need to respond, business continuity, risk, that's when they find out, well, most people just put either nothing or gobbledygook into the HR systems because they didn't have to opt in, even though obviously they're contracted, and it's different from the traditional kind of GDPR disclosure of names and personal PI, personally identifiable information. When you look at how we flip the thinking around this, and I really like how you've talked about the coexistence, but asking the question of where's the real value in the human for the future moving forward. Probably in the last 3 or 4 months, we're beginning to see how incredibly valuable human expertise, human knowledge, human intuition, human communication, relationships is, with that relationship of engaging with, deploying and managing AI, as opposed to the initial, let's get the ROI, let's see what jobs we can cut for the quick buck. And anything good in life rarely has an intrinsic huge value if the motivation is rapid cost cutting and convenience. And that moves to the spectrum of fast food through to, well, if we cut 10,000 jobs, it looks great on the balance sheet, until you realize in 2 years' time, you've had a massive decline because you've not been able to sustain, support the revenues, the growth, or anything else. How do you look at that? I'm interested to hear your spin on it.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely, Graham. That it's very businesses are very complex, and it's hard to say, well, this thing called AI is going to cure everything and do all the work. If it did do all the work, we would then have to consider, well, who has the money to buy any of the products? So if we are going to move to a world where AI does do everything, then we need to now be thinking about policy and taking humans with us to this nirvana world that is described by many tech entrepreneurs. I think that companies are finding now that perhaps it's not going to be as good as they expected it to be. And the reasons that I say that is that I think that we've got the problems of young people coming into the business, which I described earlier. I think we've got the problems of people who have vast experience in a company and perhaps don't want to use the tools, and they fear that they will be made redundant if they use the tools. I think that we're also noticing that where people have been laid off, if they have to be hired back, which we saw with Klarna, for example, you lose all of that expertise unless you can hire the exact same people back. And we know that when we hire somebody, it takes them 6 months, probably more, to actually learn about our company. And so a company that goes to AI agents and then has to pull back from that and ends up re-employing people has that sort of double whammy problem going on. So I think as I said, we've got hallucinations. The data is being cannibalized because in the world generally for LLMs and in many companies, the AI is actually creating more data than the human. And some of that data is patently wrong. And so we have all these different pieces that we didn't recognize when we first started. And humans are really important in thinking about, how in working together in teams, in thinking strategically, in leading. If you decide that you're going to replace your leaders with AI, you are eventually a company that is on its way to being led by an AI. And I think that people are now beginning to think much more seriously about, well, where do I cut? And how do I ensure, if I'm a legal firm, for example, that I don't cut all of my young lawyers, because then there's nobody left to buy the partnership off me.
Well, out of the points you've raised there, and I completely agree, I've got a few areas which I think would be great to touch on. Based upon if a company is willing to so quickly cut people, but then have to re-employ them, what type of culture would be in that company? What, as an employee, what would you be thinking if you know you are so easily expendable? And we all know a good company is made up of a good bunch of people in any particular form, in any sector, that are high performing, and very much like in the military, you need to be able to trust each other. That trust element, that we're all fighting this together, and if there is a problem, we've got each other's backs and we'll work hard to solve the problem. If the foundation is you are all expendable and we're just looking for when to replace you, then you're probably not going to get the best out of people in the slightest. So that then moves on to the leadership aspect of how do you look at it and how do you value people. And I think you've addressed a number of those points, but it does lead to a very big concept which is coming, which is, and you're the expert to have fantastic opinion on this, which is the human rights of the human and the human rights of the agents. Because if everything is to unfold where decision making and thus responsibility and potentially liability is transferred to the agentic side, I mean, an example of this, a conversation I've had with people in the medical industry. So if a surgeon can have AI make decisions, it could be potentially extremely helpful, because you could have a lot more surgery. On one side, a surgeon saying, well, I'm not going to have my job taken. But on the other side, if a hospital were to look at it and say, we can have huge amounts more surgeries, but there's no individual responsible because they have taken the surgeon, who ultimately, typically the surgeon would be insured. So the surgeon would have to stand and fall by his decisions. If that were automated, that would make the hospital liable. Now, which hospital is going to get insured and could ever afford the premium, if they could get insured, to have that level of liability, which would by proxy fall entirely onto their shoulders by the adoption of doing so? I mean, it's almost, I mean, I'm theorizing in my mind, but these are the type of thoughts that I have that a legal expert such as yourself and human rights expert would have a good opinion on.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. If you take a human who is insured out of the loop, then your company has to ensure the decisions that the AI make. And I think we're seeing that throughout business at the moment. Businesses have woken up to the fact that if they are using AI in many places, apart from the EU, the foundational model developers are not in the frame for liability. They are selling their product to the company, and the company needs to make sure that they buy the right product and they don't use it unwisely. And so we are seeing that there are cases where people are suing not the foundational model person, but the bank or the insurer or the person who's any other company you can think of, and say the hospital. And so it's really important for people to continue doing that. There is a movement out of Silicon Valley, which is suggesting that we give agents legal personhood. Well, if we give agents legal personhood and you are then harmed by an agent, unless that agent is carrying insurance as a legal person, you have no remedy. At the moment, where an agent is being used, be it that surgeon or be it an agent in a company, you can sue the company that is behind that agent. So it's really important that we push back on this legal personhood idea, because there's a lot of sort of hype about it. I don't know whether you saw a website called Rent a Human, where
I've heard
it
roughly.
was a website for AI agents to go onto the website and ask for a human. And they specifically said the human is providing the meat space between the AI and the AI, the agents. So, if you're an AI agent and you need a box delivered from one place to another, you have to employ the human in the middle. And of course, there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of hype about this. But really, what's happening is that agent is just acting on behalf of a company. It's not acting on behalf of itself. A company that wasn't using the agent would previously had an employee write an email to somebody to get them to move this from X to Y. So one of the things I think we have to be really careful about is where the hype is driving us as human beings. And you mentioned trust. We are seeing trust in AI generally falling massively. And I think that that's something that companies really need to think about. If their customers are not trusting the AI that they are using, then they are beginning to have a significant problem.
I remember seeing a talk that Ray Dalio had done, and he had talked about, obviously through the millennia, centuries, etc. One of the recognizable points, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly, but it was along the lines of, if you lose trust in your media, if you lose trust in your politics, there are particular bastions of society that, as lost, become a precursor for chaos and potential war and mass economic change. And in many ways, we're seeing components of that. I mean, even more recently, I'm thinking of the open claw. And I'm thinking, if you put things open source, where there is no recognized owner, but you understand the chaos that you're putting out to the world, you understand what people will do, because part of human nature with some, it's obviously the motivation of greed and the idea that something could work on your behalf around the clock so that you can get immediate benefit and gain, and disproportionately so. Isn't that also mirroring the behavior of certain aspects of how we've seen this modern wave of AI? But equally, it's a warning sign of how we should think about it and how we should position ethics. And probably a lot of those people are, who have done it for possibly selfish reasons, will end up, and we have seen, have ended up with a little bit of harm, because you skip a load of steps. You're going to have your security compromised, your identity stolen. There are all manner of consequences which the greedy mind oversees.
Absolutely. And I was reading something the other day which said, which said that anybody can create a website and use and can code now, but they don't know whether they've got the right controls in place, and therefore we should become more suspicious of just giving our data, which we do all the time, and our credit cards and things to random websites. So, again, that places on us, the human, the burden of checking and checking again. I think that we are also seeing that chaos is perhaps the outcome of the greater outcome of AI than the benefits in business. So we originally thought we would have these huge benefits in business, and we're now seeing some pushback against those huge benefits in business. But on the other hand, we are seeing our small children affected by using artificial AI toys. We're seeing AI hitting the classroom without actually any studies being done about whether it is a good thing or a bad thing. We're seeing the loneliness epidemic made worse because it's easy to cleave to an AI bot if you're lonely, rather than go out and try and make people connections. We are seeing at the moment play out in the Pentagon a discussion about whether AI is going to be used in lethal autonomous weapons. They're the weapons that shoot to kill without further order. So all around us, we have these big decisions being made about AI, which we don't trust as individuals or as employees or as customers. And so it's difficult to see whether the balance is actually tipping for the good or the bad. But what we also see, as you have rightly said, is, one of the arguments at the Pentagon at the moment between the Pentagon and Anthropic, which supplies Claude to them, is should we have mass surveillance of using AI of American citizens? These are huge conversations that are going on, and really we need to step back and say, how much good is AI doing for us, and where should we be regulating it so we don't have the bad?
In many ways, it goes back to the very human-centric point of what do we want in life, in business, in creativity? What are we trying to achieve? What do we find acceptable, not acceptable? The non-negotiables, such as we will not compromise on truth, we will not compromise on trust. And that should be the core of every business in reality, especially with critical functions, as well as in life, because you can. Dr. Gino Strada had said to me years ago, at the end of the film we did, actually, he said, cut a picture out of a child in war, put a picture of your own child's face there, and then you will understand war. So in that same vein, we can look at this at an arm's length, and it's happening all around us, but how do we make it humanly relatable to say, how would you feel if the consequences of the things that you hear in the media directly affected your aging father or mother or granddad or your young kids or the people that are close to you? I think at some point we'll all begin to feel a bit of consequence of the backlash of the negative things. We'll I think a lot of people will see some of the good things. But again, it goes back to the negotiables and the non-negotiables. And it should really be a human decision for humans in general to decide the standards which we expect for the world we live in. Because ultimately, there's the third-party AI idea and argument, but everything technology created by mankind is very much that, by mankind for mankind. You take all of humans out of the loop, there wouldn't be anything there, would there?
Well, absolutely not. And one wonders, what happens if AI is doing everything and humans are doing nothing? You know, would we humans be comfortable doing nothing? I don't know about you, but I really enjoy my work. I would be very uncomfortable sitting doing nothing. I mean, I could garden, I could walk my dog, I could go running, I could, there are lots of things I could do, but I don't know that I would feel as fulfilled as I do by by my work. And that's part of a conversation that we are simply not having. And I think that's because, we only see in the papers the hype. And we and that scares people. And there are some really good things that you can do with AI, but we're not having that balance. We just are being pressed forward or feel as if we're being pressed forward by the hype. And I think to your point about how we think about things, one of the things that I do recommend to companies is to think about where AI would be really useful doing jobs and where humans would be really useful and where your customers would expect a human or at least expect to be told that it's an AI doing the job. And so, there is a and that really means that we should, as human beings, be taking control of which jobs we're happy with AI doing. I have my own sort of experience there because I had breast cancer a couple of years ago. And my medical oncologist said to me, well, Kay, wouldn't it be amazing if we could have an AI, create an AI which would walk you through your journey with cancer? And I said, well, actually, I'd prefer you, the human, to walk me through my journey with cancer. But why don't we think about what we could do with AI that would free up your time so that you can have that person-to-person contact? And, it's those sort of things where it it might be great to have that tool available, perhaps for someone who doesn't speak English, but really when you're in that human risk of perhaps dying, you want another human.
Mm. Well, I think there's a new wave coming, and I completely agree. It's easy for a small subset of people in the world to assume the rest of the world needs to live according to their rules, and they set the tone of what this future nirvana is. But I know, and I would agree, and many of the people that I've interviewed have had incredible lives, irrespective of background or industry. They have worked for it, but it is because they have worked for it. They have enjoyed it. And probably the term work to many people is a mislabeling because it's a passion. And of course, if you mislabel things, then you come to the assumptions of what perhaps work can be perceived as. But speaking to an artist that works hard, speaking to an athlete that works hard, speaking to a surgeon, or as you say, a lawyer, a barrister, um, the passion that drives an individual to do something, the adversity, the challenge, to overcome it, to beat the odds, to fail, along the way, but to overcome, that is the human experience, and that is where the value is. It's not at the end of it, it is the journey itself. I mean, if that is the human construct, then the idea of the augmented human, where it's extended its capability, its a human scale. As you say, a good example there with the oncologist. Imagine he could do more for more people. Well, an augmented human approach would allow that, but it's never a replacement. It's an enhancement of capability. We're probably going to see, and I personally believe it. I have many reasons to believe it, and from speaking to many experts, including yourself, that we're moving into a world where there will be democratized AI. And the difference between what we have now and where it's going is it will be personal control over the ability of multiple modes of AI to the individual and the groups and the company's benefit, as opposed to what is currently not democratized, where simply customers, we're not really in control of much. That will change, and it will be driven by business, it will be driven by people, it will be driven from everyone of every political divide, because personal choice is the foundation of being a human. And in the end, people will drive innovation, they will drive creativity and say, we choose this, as opposed to the only choice we've been led to believe we have currently. That's my 2 pennies worth.
Well, I very much hope that you're right, Graham. I think at the moment we sort of, it's hard to see because we're being farmed for our data at the moment, and many people again don't recognize that. And so every time you're using an LLM, you are giving up something of yourself that enables it to learn more about you. And one of the things that worries me so much is that when our children are using it all the time to ask personal questions, they're putting in their personal data, they're putting in their friends' personal data, um, and the concept of human agency and autonomy really appears to be disappearing. And one of the things that coming back on, will have democratized AI. If you look at the UK, the government is saying we will regulate through the regulator rather than having special regulation because we want innovation, and regulation kills innovation. And I don't believe that, so I could go off on that tangent, but I want to stick with this one. And that is, the UK needs to be the startup, have lots and lots of AI startups. Well, how many startups actually go on to be Amazon, for example? Very few. And so at the moment, the policy seems to be, we'll have all these startups that will bring a lot of benefit to the economy. But if none of them thrive, or only one of them thrives, does that actually is it worth the risk that we are currently running with our human population?
It also raises a question of long-term versus short-term, and Amazon as an example. That was a long-term business. It was backed for a long time. The play, as was seen in the end, which was done incredibly well, was infrastructure, not selling books. So the idea of quickly, fail fast. None of the businesses which have become incredible institutions, even Apple nearly went bankrupt several times. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, one of the first things he did was cut all the product lines, and that business was on the precipice. Yet people forget that, or people conveniently remember small elements. I mean, even a company that is huge now, but for the first 10 years of its life wasn't anywhere near as successful and nearly went under, was even Palantir. So, I mean, that people don't remember the first 10 years. And if we take the attitude of quickly, startup, then it's like looking at planting a tree and just getting angry and saying, forget that one, forget that one. Of course, in 20 years' time, you can grow an oak if cared for carefully and watered all the time. It's the same nurturing. So that does come back down to the immediate comprehension, the understanding, and all of the topics that you've covered and that you've done a remarkable job in your book of covering. There is so much more thought to consider and conversation to have to really see through the very throwaway headlines. And whilst it may be a roller coaster ride, it's a long-term journey, because one thing which isn't going anywhere is people, it's humans.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things that makes me happy or gives me a little bit of a little bit of light is that we are seeing, because there is a upswing in worrying about artificial intelligence and the planet. We are seeing a pullback of governors in the United States, of states that had been offering um, big tax breaks and things like that to data centers. And now both colored parties, the governors are stepping back and saying, well, if you are going to have a data center, you are going to have to pay. There cannot be raises in electricity. You can't take all the water. And so it does appear that some people are learning that this technology comes with consequences for humans.
And I suppose that's a good thing that for the first time in perhaps many years, in many countries, I'm not going to be specific intentionally, that people on different sides of the aisle can come to an agreement, which is a human first decision, which is then also economy first and business first and a number of things first, which should be the function of what our structures of governance are there for, to serve the people and
Mhm.
all within it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important that governments remember that they are there because we put them there, and they are there because there is a social contract between, or there should be a social contract between the voters and the government. And if you just do nothing about a technology that could be as seriously damaging as AI, then that's not fulfilling your social contract with voters. And then on the other side of the world, we've got Australia saying we need to move to protect our children in terms of social media. And I think that that's going to be a really interesting experiment as to how that works out. And it'll be interesting whether anybody else follows them.
Well, in many ways, we're going to see what the damage probably is when the damage is no longer visible, because this has been a creep over a decade, and it's almost like the frog in the boiling water. Maybe it's not a frog, whatever the analogy is, and just raising the temperature, and suddenly we'll realize, hold on a second, that it's now very black and white in the extremity of where things got to. So
And we do see a little bit of that now, as and I think it's important for businesses to take it on, and that's one that if you are that your new employees' attention span is much less than it used to be through social media. Their ability to actually retain information is also affected by a combination of AI and social media, because if you use AI as opposed to doing your own research, you don't learn as much, and therefore you don't retain retain the information. Then you move to, there isn't a trust amongst young people of the technology, which is, and you shouldn't be trusting it. And then we go back to the comment I made earlier about it's being used so much that it has made them dumber.
Yeah. So before the last little thought, could you tell me the most valuable lesson you learned from the entire process of writing the book?
I think the most valuable lesson I learned was that AI is going to be present in our lives in all sorts of ways, but it is for us humans to make the decision of how it's going to be in our lives. And if we don't start voicing our views now, I think we will find ourselves moving into a future where we have less and less control as human beings, which would be really dramatically bad for our children and their children and beyond.
So on that note, tell us where we can get the book. Remind us of the name again. And yeah.
Yeah, so the book's called Coexisting with AI: Work, Love, and Play in a Changing World. And you can get it by going to my website, or you can get it by going to Amazon, or you can get it from Waterstones or Barnes and Noble or your local bookseller. Yes. And please, if you know a lot about AI, buy it and give it to your friend who doesn't, because the more of us who know about AI, the better the conversations that we can have about what we want for the future.
Excellent. We'll put all the links in the description and encourage people to read it. It's a fantastic book.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.